Tipping Spears with Hannah Becker. Today's conversation promises to be an insightful one with remarkable guests. Whether you're joining us for the first time or you're a regular listener, we're so glad you're here. Our goal is to bring you closer to the innovative leaders and thinkers shaping our future. And today, I am thrilled to welcome Dr. Kyleanne Hunter. Dr. Hunter serves as the CEO of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, a role in which she provides strategic leadership to ensure the post 9/11 generation of veterans remains at the forefront of national conversations. A lifelong servant leader, Dr. Hunter is deeply committed to inspiring veterans to achieve their full potential and advocating for the policies necessary to support their journey. Before IAVA, she was a senior political scientist at RAND, where she spearheaded the Women, Peace, and Security Initiative. Additionally, she held multiple professorships at the RAND School of Public Policy, Oregon State University, and the United States Air Force Academy. She's a highly decorated Marine Corps combat veteran who completed multiple deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan as an AH-1W Super Cobra attack pilot. Welcome to Tipping Spears, Dr. Hunter.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, I just want to start today off with one of my favorite questions, which is, where does your story begin?
Yeah, I was actually thinking about this a lot when we talk about stories, right? And how we all bring a piece of ourself and our narrative and our stories to who we are and the work we do. And for the purposes of really where I am right now, it will sound a little cliche, but I do need to go back to early childhood to think about where these things started. So I grew up in the Bay Area of California, which is not a place where you often see Marines coming from, but more and more are coming from the areas. It's a good thing that we see there. But I was fortunate to grow up in a family where my curiosity for the world was really, really encouraged. I had a mother who was very focused on the sort of you go girl attitude about just about anything that I wanted to do in life, and really encouraged me to push barriers, whether that was in sports. I was one of the first girls to play on the water polo team in high school. There wasn't a girls team, and so I said, well, I will try out for the boys team and make it. I was often alone in AP science classes with me and just a few boys in the class that way. And so it was really encouraged that I pushed myself, that I tried things that were different. And when I made the decision to become a Marine, it was one that I think caught a lot of people by surprise. I don't come from a military family, but it also wasn't something that was like a knee-jerk to 9/11 reaction. I was really thinking about, what did I want to do? And how did I want to serve? And service has been something that was also very, very important in my family, and something that both my parents really centered themselves around, was how we serve and how we show up for others. And the Marine Corps just seemed a natural fit for that for me. And I was again super ignorant about all things military when I joined. So when they showed up and the recruiting officer was asked me, he said, well, you can be a ground contract and you'll be like a secretary or something, or we can put you on an air contract. You can go fly whatever you want. I was like, oh, well, that sounds cool. I don't even know what that means. Now that I know how recruiting works, I was like, oh, they need pilots, and this is how they sucker us into these jobs. And it, but it turned out to be an amazing experience. I didn't come in with this lifelong dream of flying, but ended up loving. I mean, I also fly in helicopters rather than fly in airplanes any day of the week too. A little bit of bias there that I have, but once again, I found myself in an environment like I did many, many times as a child and a young woman, where I was the only woman in the room. The Cobra community doesn't have a whole lot of women in it still, even to this day. It's good to see that there's more, but really having that you go girl, you can do it, sort of push it attitude and encouragement helped me along that way. And then as I was thinking about my post Marine Corps career and what I wanted to do, my last job when I was active duty was in the Office of Legislative Affairs for the House of Representatives, and this is when we were doing the Don't Ask, Don't Tell repeal. It was also around the same time that the Women in Ground Combat Exclusion was being done, and there were a lot of these questions as to like, well, how are we going to write the policy? How are we going to write the policy around these new laws? And what I found sitting in the seat is that there was very, very little research that had been done around a lot of these topics, connecting these military personnel sides to sort of the military effectiveness side, right? There was a lot of emotion, there was a lot of passion, there was a lot of stories, and those are all important. But when it comes to like writing really good policy, we need really good research. And seeing that didn't exist, I had this second crazy idea of my life: first to become a Marine, second to say, well, I'm going to go get a doctorate and figure out how to do this research, really with the understanding that to do good, solid advocacy, you need a good, solid backbone of research there. And I truly believe that evidence and research is a way to give voice to those who are often voiceless, to lift up those that are very, very underrepresented. And since then, that's been a lot of what I've been doing, whether it's in academia, whether at Rand, and it really feels like a full circle moment to come lead an advocacy organization with not just only a strong, background in deploying to Iraq and Afghanistan, but in a strong background in evidence-based policy and how to do evidence-based policy, because I believe that's how we are the most successful and can really build coalitions to do the right things on behalf of the post 9/11 generation.
Yeah, that's so fascinating to hear your journey and kind of see those seeds of encouragement that was planted, and then how you use it to contribute today. As you're talking and you're just kind of thinking about your research, kind of the questions that you approached it with. I mean, you really provided the information where kind of the rubber meets the road. I feel like these are topics people are very emotional about, and it's like, yeah, let's do this, and then nothing happens. And we forget of it's like, it's a little more than just like, yeah, it's a great idea, that should be changed. There has to be some data to back it up. So kudos to you for tackling that behemoth of a challenge.
Just a little mountain to climb.
Just a little one. You go, girl. Yeah. So was there a particular event or person that kind of served as a catalyst for your career?
And yes, so in terms of like, I look at this in a few different ways as it. And one is, when I was in high school, I had the fortune of attending Bill Clinton's inauguration as part of the National Young Leadership Conference, and that actually changed my entire like. It sounds like very reductivist to say, but it's 100% true that changed the trajectory of my life. After going and being there and I had been to Washington, D.C. like as a kid on a vacation type thing.
Yeah.
But being there, and I had watched plenty of presidential speeches on TV and done all that, but really being in the crowd, hearing the words, being part of everything, and not just all the big parties that had happened, but really deliberately what it meant to hold this office. I got home from that trip, and this was in January of my senior year of high school, and I told my parents, I said, I'm gonna go to Georgetown. And they were like, you're already like accepted to colleges and things are like, you can't apply now. And I was like, well, basically try me, right? And this was the 90s, so there was not like the internet to do these things either. So I literally got a typewriter and wrote a letter to the Georgetown's admissions office and went into like the US News and World Report's book and like found their address and sent them this letter and said, here's, this is who I am. I was just in DC. Like, this has changed my life. This is what I want to do, right? I want to serve this country. And it has 100% changed my mindset and how I want to show up in the world. And I did, like, I got in, and that was the thing where like 2 months later, I got the thick envelope that came in the mail, and I was like, what just happened? Right? Like, I don't think this is how it's supposed to work, but like some sympathetic soul got that letter somewhere in the admissions office and was like, we should give her a chance. And while I was there, I had the opportunity to have some like amazing professors, one of whom was Dorothy Denning, who was really one of the first pioneers in sort of cyber defense and cybersecurity that we had, as well as Father Winters. Georgetown being a Jesuit school, it did have some Jesuit professors who taught an ethics in international relations classes, who always continued to push around like, what is justice and what is peace, and like, what is the role of the military and all this. And that's when I started to get a little bit interested in like, well, what is this, defense military thing that I don't really know a whole lot about, and we're confused. And I was out for a run one day in DC, and I saw the Marines practicing for their like silent drill team at the Marine Corps Memorial there. And I was like, oh, I bet they have a really cool job. And so that is like, that was like really the spark. And so it's the, you know, the two things that I think really were the spark and impetus for my career, like, you know, attending Clinton's first inauguration and then seeing the Marines out with their drill team. And I, you know, putting those two things together really was how I ended up where I am by a series of very happy accidents along the way.
So I know, every journey has its hurdles. Can you tell us kind of what some of the biggest obstacles were that you faced and kind of how you overcame them in your career?
Absolutely, you know, and there are some that, you know, I think when people often talk about like being a Marine, right? They're like, think, oh, it's really like tough and it's hard that way. I am also probably a bit of a crazy person where like I loved officer candidate school. I
I
loved the
guess.
basic, you know, like I was like, oh, I get to just run around in the woods for like, you know, I have no other responsibility. This is awesome. Like this is like, this is like the best job in the world. Everything should be there, right? But when I think about where real obstacles came in, other than things like flying a helicopter is objectively hard. It is not
Mhm.
something that people are born innately with the skill to do. That's there. But when I think about them, I think about things like, you know, being a woman showing up in the Cobra community, like it was difficult to find gear that fit me, right? I was
Mhm.
continually, when we would deploy, being isolated from my peers because they're like, oh, well, the women have to go sleep over in
Yeah.
like this side of the base and the men can sleep over here. Then I was like, I don't even know when I'm supposed to leave, right? Like when we're supposed to like move somewhere, right? So there were these structural barriers that
Mhm.
made it much more difficult for me to just do my job. And I was here
Mhm.
like just wanting to do my job. So I think some of
Mhm.
the bigger barriers with, and this is another thing that got me very very involved in the research that I did is, you know, we heard a lot of things like, oh well, women are allowed to fly any aircraft,
Mhm.
right? Which was true, right? They had opened up all combat aviation to women, and we were allowed to actually fly anything, and many of us were very very successful in doing it. But what often isn't accounted for when they make that sort of grand provision, right? Like women are
Mhm.
now allowed to do this, is
Mhm.
what are all the micro policies that need to be changed to actually allow women to do it in the same way as
Mhm.
their male counterparts. So whether that is gear that fits appropriately, you know, I remember showing up my first deployments and like there weren't sappy plates that fit me, and like trying to fly the Cobra with sappy plates that are way too big and like up in my face because I was sitting and like they were getting shoved up like around my ears and then my helmet wouldn't fit on, right? Like it's a little bit of an extra challenge that a lot of my peers didn't have to deal with, right? Or even things of like being able to relieve myself in the aircraft, right?
Mhm.
And having to jump
Mhm.
off because the options are what, you dehydrate yourself or you're miserable, right?
Mhm.
And you know, on that side, or being physically separated from
Mhm.
the rest of my squadron and my units when
Mhm.
critical information is getting passed. That there were these, and I was very very fortunate to have some incredible advocates for me, right?
Mhm.
I don't want to come out and this is not a like all men are horrible type thing, right? I had
Mhm.
some personally incredibly amazing advocates, and I look at like the mentors that are you know, still to this day incredibly important mentors to me, you know, one of whom, you know, recently retired as a three-star general, and one of the first things he said to me when we met, when he was I think he was like a lieutenant colonel and I was a captain, it was around that differential, is that he said, you know, I don't know the struggles you're facing because the Marine Corps was built for me. So you
Mhm.
need to tell me the struggles so I can help you remove the barriers. Right.
Mhm.
And like that to me was like very, so like I had incredible advocates, but it still is the point that there are these barriers that existed that made it just very, very difficult to do the job, right? To do the things that we had to had to do, right? And that was the, and that then unfortunately creates a reinforcing narrative that we see way too often where women don't have the opportunity to just act the same, right? The whole thing is we want one set of standards. Like, great, everyone is arguing for good and advocating for, I want to argue, advocating for high standards based on what you need to do. But if you're put at a structural disadvantage, you're actually not meeting the same standards. You're having to work above and beyond it. And so when something happens, well, now it reinforces the narrative that, like, see, women shouldn't be there, right? And it may be because, we get injured, and I'm sure you've had these experiences too, right? We get injured because gear doesn't fit, right? And when you get injured, you can't participate in training. Well, you can't participate in training, and then you like miss out on something next. So it creates this self-fulfilling cycle, which then creates this culture of like, oh, well, you're less than or other than or different. That's there. And like, I remember, my for like my first several years in the squadron, like all I wanted to do was blend in. All I wanted to do was just not be visible, right? Like, be able to make a mistake and be just like all the dudes with short haircuts who made a mistake, made the exact same mistake, right? Nobody care about it, because like, it's a very common mistake, because guess what? Like, flying a Cobra is not a natural thing, and we all make mistakes as we're learning how to do it. But the fact that just the structure of the institution was not made for female bodies to show up in it, created barriers that I was really ignorant to coming in, but have then now spent the decades past trying to get rid of.
Well, I appreciate your devoted hard work in this area, Kai. I spent a significant portion of my career in all male spaces, whether that's senior military colleges where my entire class is male, all my colleagues are male. I am the woman, like the woman in the building, the woman, And then when I did some work at the soft community, again, the woman, and just like finding mentors, or even finding someone, like I would watch, my husband was in the service and his experience was totally different, because he has this instant hierarchical mentorship, buddies. People will go to lunch with him and fill him in.
Mine too.
Yeah. And then with me, I was so naive, Kai. I was just like, well, I met the standards. They wanted me. Here I am,
and it creates, I've seen like one of three things happen with this, right? One, it's either the like, oh, we're going to have a woman, I guess you're the one, and you're not like all the other women, right? So that's the, like, we can still hate women, but we like you, right? Like, you're not actually like the amount of times the amount of I'm sure you've got many of that too. Like, oh, well, you're okay because you're not really. And I was like, no, I actually really am. Like, sorry, I am. That's that way. Or there's like the pariah mentality of like, if I get too close to you, then either they're gonna think that there's something untoward about me, or your womanness is gonna rub off on me. I'm like, I don't know, like, I'm not contagious. Like, it might happen, right? And if it does, maybe like, if you get some cooties, maybe you'll stink a little bit less, right? Like, this could be a little bit better that you have it, right? Like, maybe you could use some cooties at this point, or it becomes very much the idea of like the exception that proves the rule for things, right? Of like, the reason we need to exclude women is because we have this one, right? We have this thing, so we can use this as the reason to say we actually don't need to progress anymore, because look, we won, we have a woman, right? Like, that is we check the box. And the amount of times that would, I remember being in some spaces when we were expanding a lot of the work around the women in ground combat exclusion being rescinded, and actually like deliberately creating cohorts of women into combat arms. And sitting there, and a retired male officer coming up to me, and he's like, there's been a woman 4-star, what are you complaining about? And I'm like, okay, well, there's been a man 4-star, do we need another one? I mean, it's like that's the, like, we had one, we don't need it anymore, right? We're done, we've finished that. So but that also becomes so much of that like exception that proves the rule, right? Like, oh, you did it, check, we're done.
Well, I appreciate your willingness to tackle that, address it. It's just, I couldn't figure out what was going on in my career for like a decade, Kai, because it's like, go in this all male space, burn out. I would spend all my efforts trying to just like wash the woman off me, if that makes sense. Like, get the hair up, like just, just
so
hide
often.
it. all the
Yeah.
time. And it's just, and it never worked. That was the crazy thing. It never worked. And it's just
No.
a cycle.
Well, and then the other piece of it that, I think it relates to a lot of the work that I do now that's so important is like, so when we're in, right, we're in uniform, we are so visible. Everyone, like, there is no way to like wash the woman off of you, right? You are, doesn't matter what you do, you are still seen as being, the woman, and you're either too feminine or too butch or too whatever, like
Mhm.
whatever they want to make you too of for their thing, they'll add a to something to you. There's nothing you can just be, right? And then as soon as you take the uniform off, you're never veteran enough, right? You're never
Mm.
like assumed to be veteran enough, right? You don't have that when you walk into a space still to this day. And I mean, leading this organization, it happens to me, right? Like, I am the CEO of a veterans organization,
Yeah.
and I'll often get asked, they're like, "Oh, what's your affiliation with the military?" Like, well, me, I am my affiliation with the military at this
Yeah.
point, right? So it becomes this sense of like almost invisibility that shows
Yeah.
up of like oh well, like, you must be a great supporter, or great, you must like be married into the military or a daughter of this, right? No, like, no, it's me. And still,
Mm.
in 2025, having to push back on that narrative that we're invisible as soon as we take the uniform off. It creates a really interesting sort of identity dichotomy often of like, oh, I spent so long trying to like hide the woman, and now that I'm able to be a woman again, like, I'm trying to be the veteran, right? Like, be the veteran, and where that sort of tug and pull is often a difficult one to navigate.
Yeah, no, that's a fascinating way to frame it. It is. So when you want to do like a second or third PhD, you could do your dissertation
Yeah.
on that. Do you- Book
Yeah.
ideas.
Okay. Yeah.
So, can you tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about your, transition from the military and share any advice you have for vets who are, kind of starting a new chapter after service?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. The transition period is difficult. And I think anyone who says like, "Oh, I had a great easy transition," like, they're a liar. Straight up liar. No, there is no such thing as like everything was roses when I transitioned from it, right? I would say I had a fortunate transition going into academia for a while, right? I went to get my doctorate right out of transition, only because it gave me actually time and space to reflect on what I cared about, who I was, right? Like, going to grad school is actually like one of the best times to do anything, right? Because your only job is to like read and think. And like, when else do we have? Our only responsibility is like, did I do the reading, and did I think about things? And it's actually I think a very positive sort of reintroduction to the civilian world in a lot of ways, because you're in a space where critical thinking, we're asking hard questions, right? Those things are encouraged, right? And you were sort of intentionally put in almost an incubator of all sorts of different people, right? I look at like when I was in my grad program, right, I had a previous career, and I'm coming in as a second, and my cohort, there were everything from people who had been right out of undergrad into this to folks who were 15 years older than me doing a career change in their
Mhm.
in their 60s at this point, right? Like, being close to 60 and saying I want to go back to a career change. So it was a really, like, for me, that was a really, really good good environment. But then it became very, very tough and figure out, okay, now what am I going to do with this degree? Because I was in a very, as an academic, in a very interesting spot where like I wasn't some brand new young academic who was one of the people who like schools will want to pluck to be assistant professors because like, oh, we can shape you in our image and make you. They're like, nope, you're a little too old for that. But I also like wasn't a retired general, so it's not like they want
Yeah.
me for those things, which is
Yeah.
where I started finding my space in like advocacy and policy work, because I knew how to navigate the Hill. I
Mhm.
still had really good connections from my time when I had been working on the Hill, and it was really what I was passionate about. And it was tough because it was a bit of a break from what academia expected of me, right? Academia said like, oh, you're supposed to go be an academic. I was also fortunate to be I went to University of Denver, the Corbell School, to get my doctorate. Me and Condi Rice were were alum. I can say we're there two. No, she is our most famous, well, not me, but I'll put myself in her orbit. General Casey as well was there too, so I'm in very good company at the degree there. But I was really fortunate that it was that it is a public policy focused school and is an application focused school where I had the support to say, I've done some of the academic stuff. I'm really happy. I do love teaching. I love teaching college kids. Like, they are a great age to teach. They are absolutely fascinating to teach. And I still do like adjunct and get excited about teaching college kids. But I was like, I don't want to be an academic. I think there's a lot more I can do. And so having that support to get into advocacy, to get into public policy really did help me. And I've seen, it brings some credence, especially when I go in and talk about like why we need to strengthen women's healthcare as a national security priority. Being someone who spent so much of my 20s and 30s, downrange doing the thing, right? It's a lot easier for me to come in and say like, well, this is why we need to have mammogram machines on bases, right? Which is often a conversation that people would be like, yeah, okay, well then what are you talking about? But then I can talk about like, exposure and breast cancer and like bring all of that, the data in there. And so, I would, I would always encourage anyone, just go to grad school when you're coming out of your time of transition. It'll give you a little space to think about what you want to do and meet some really incredibly interesting people.
That was great. Such good advice.
Yeah. And you'll never know. Like, I really didn't. I think a lot of people, there's this expectation as soon as you leave the military, like, oh, you know exactly what you want to do. Right. Like, that's the expectation. But in reality, like, how much of us really know what we want to do? Like, do I even know what I want to do tomorrow? I don't know. Like, and so it does, I'd also say it's also the grad school is the only time in your life probably when you get to do exactly what you want to do, right? You get to take the classes you want to take. You get to like read the things you want to read, because once you're in the civilian working world, no, you don't get to what you want to do either. As much as we always think the grass is greener, right? Oh, look at how easy it is over this field. No, we still don't get to do what we want to do on the side of the fence either.
So in your role as CEO of IAVA, you're on the front lines of addressing many of the challenges that the modern veteran community faces. Can you tell us kind of what the top challenges that you're seeing impacting Iraq and Afghanistan veterans now in 2025?
Yeah. So if we think about the challenges that are facing veterans, I like to think about them in sort of three buckets that we have, right? One are challenges that are happening because of veteran and veteran status that exists right now. So challenges that would be sort of unique to veterans. And when I look at that, I think we've seen, when we look at the VA and a lot of the sort of opaqueness and chaos that we've seen in the VA and the reduction in force, recently the Inspector General report came out that showed that, in every single VA medical center, there are critical shortages, every single one, right? That there are critical healthcare shortages that exist, right? And that's a huge challenge, because if we think about the post 9/11 generation of veterans, we're one of the biggest. We are the biggest cohort of wartime veterans ever that we've had in this country. We are the most diverse cohort of veterans that we've ever seen, because of the opening of so many different roles to women, to the LGBTQ community, to full desegregation that we've seen, a lot of the incentives of pathways to citizenship that came. So we're incredibly diverse. We have very complex healthcare needs because of compound exposures, both physically and mentally, and the mental health side that's part of it. And then we see things like the huge benefits of like the PACT Act, which opened up healthcare for hundreds of thousands of new veterans that we have. And so at that time, what we should be seeing is a expansion of VA direct care services, of people who are culturally competent and equipped to understand and deal with the unique impacts of our service, right? The unique things that impacted our service. And so I think that the biggest challenge in the threat is at the time when, and also you add to the fact that like a good chunk of us are into the like aging side of the house now, right? Like, I think there's still often this like belief that the Iraq and Afghanistan veterans are all a bunch of 25-year-olds. Like, you know, no, not 25-year-old hair anymore, right? Getting a little gray up there, and like, and so now you're having it coupled with, just as we age, our healthcare needs change, and now when we
Yeah.
age, when you add to that the, environmental exposures, the combat trauma that might be coming to that, like there is a real concern around VA services, and I think there's to put a bigger explanation point on it. The mental health aspects
Mhm.
of this are very, very concerning. If you look at even things of like suicidality rates that we see, that the biggest threat, or the biggest threat time is like that year post separation.
Yeah.
Then the next highest area is between the ages of 55 and 60, and that's because there are big life changes that happen right at that time. If we think about it, it's often where
Mhm.
retirement starts to be, people start to actually think about what real retirement looks like. And right now, we know financial situations are not awesome for retiring, right? So people are facing that. For those that had families, this becomes like the first real empty nester time, right? That sort of age,
Mhm.
right, which is real, like, okay, I don't, a lot of the fact of like, kids kept me going, things like that kept me going, right? That's gone at this point. And then it's also when, like, just frankly, hormonal changes start to happen, right? Our actual body chemistry starts to change, which impacts our mental health. And so, our generation of veterans is sort of sweet spot aging right into there. And so that direct health aspect is one huge pillar of a challenge that we're facing. The next is, I think, really with regards to what's happening with our Afghan and Iraqi wartime allies right now. One of the number one things that I hear from our members is a huge concern over how our Afghan and Iraqi wartime allies are being treated. How, special immigrant visa status being shut down, the shutdowns of things like the care office, the processing of P1, P2. I mean, this is with the complete and utter chaos that was the withdrawal after the fall of Kabul. So many in our generation put their own like blood, sweat, tears, and money into ensuring that folks got out. And we look at something like Operation Enduring Welcome was the most secure immigration process that the U.S. has ever seen. Right? And seeing those now seeing the attacks on the funding and the programs in Iraq, and there's now concern as well for what's happening in other parts of the world where we have allies. That this is it may not sound like, it often sounds like why would this issue be like an issue that's impacting veterans? It's not a veteran issue, but like it really is. Like if you think about like where there's deep moral injury around the way that our allies were treated, that deeply, deeply impacts veterans. And this is something where the vast majority of our members wants to keep pushing that we do more, right? We honor our promise, and we really honor what it means to have been someone who stood shoulder to shoulder to fight with us. And then finally, the one thing that I think is very interesting about our population when we look at a challenge facing is like there's a lot of concern around the polarization of this country right now and the politicalization of the military and the veterans community. One thing, around all of us, when we put the uniform on, we swear an oath to the Constitution, and we work with people that we never would have been exposed to otherwise in life, right? We don't get a choice who they are, right? Like neither of us chose who we were in those rooms, and we were the only woman, right? But we figured out how to make it work. And I think there's becoming, unfortunately, and one of my biggest fears is that our community becomes so sort of disillusioned and apathetic about democracy in the country, because we look out and what do we see out there? We see an incredibly polarizing narratives that are done. We see incredibly political statements being made about the military right now. We see incredibly political statements being made about veterans, and quite frankly, it turns our community off. Right? We've got almost three-quarters of our members say that democracy isn't working for us right now the way that it should be. And so, I mean, that's really a cornerstone of a concern that we have.
Yeah, that's such a great overview. I think it's very enlightening. I know for myself, I didn't even think about kind of the aging component, um,
Yeah.
and the polarization within The veteran community, just as you were speaking, I mean, there's like example after example after example in my own life recently coming to the forefront. So
Yeah.
I know, there's lots of misconceptions that people have about the veteran community. One thing, when I first learned about IAVA was, wow, at this point, it's been a while, like well over a decade. And I
Yeah.
remember,
And we're over 20 years old, which I think, again, when people think about like, how old is these wars? Like, no, our
well,
organization's over 2 decades.
well, I remember printing off y'all's website and carrying that up to the VA because you had information on stuff
Hmm.
related to Iraq and Afghanistan. And I'm carrying in there to the VA doctors who want to treat my spouse at the time like he's a Vietnam vet, which is not
Hmm.
what was going on. And I just I
Hmm.
remember just kind of y'all being so much on the front lines of really shaping the narrative of, the post 9/11 generation. And I know, you know, 20 years have passed, but there's still misconceptions that people have. So whether they're
Oh, yeah.
civilians, policymakers, these misconceptions about the veteran community. And I just wondered if you could kind of speak to kind of what you see with that, and kind of your thoughts on those misconceptions. I know they often evolve, but just kind of what we're dealing with today.
Yeah. So I'm a good academic, so I do things in threes. My good 3 points here, right, that we have here. And so first and foremost, I think, and it ties a little bit to even what you were saying about the aging side of things, where I think there's a misconception just in the popular zeitgeist that veterans are either these very young, hard charging, like 25-year-olds, or like geriatric grandparents,
Mhm.
right? Like that you're one or the other, right? You are the very old, like, you know, geriatric side. We see, like, it's really like what I would remember is like the World War II,
Yeah,
type that we see now,
the
veteran, right?
hat.
Or
Yeah.
the, yeah, with the hats, right? You wear your hats that are there, or you're, just out and you're angry, and all of all of that, right?
Oh, go
So,
ahead.
but the majority of veterans are like, we are working age people who
Mhm.
are in the civilian workforce now, raising families, doing all of those things, right? So I think it's like a big misconception is that, we're on one of these extremes, but the reality is, like, we're all just sort of like boring like everybody else, right? Like, we are in, if you look at like our bell curve distribution, right? Most are just trying to have many of the same struggles that everybody else has, right? Job satisfaction and what our job is, right? Making sure families are taken care of, right? Wanting to know where we want to live, right? So that's, I think, one of the biggest misconceptions of, like, just sort of where we fall demographically that's there. The next is, I think, that we are a monolith in many ways, and I think this is, as we look at, we are coming into, we're now just over 50 years of the all volunteer force. Like, our generation of veteran is the first generation that grew up completely with an all volunteer force. And so we are less monolithic, and I think there's, to put in the, like, there was a lot of military sociology done in the 50s, 60s, and 70s that people still, like, hold on to. That's just not true anymore, because that was all done. I'm thinking of, like, the Huntington and the Janowitz work around, like, the soldier in the state and all of that. I was like, okay, that was true, and we had a draft, and the way the draft worked. But with an all volunteer force, we're very different, right? We come from literally everywhere, right? However, service is becoming concentrated in more and more families, right? So you see two things happening at the same time, which is really interesting. One is that there's a bit of like a democratization of service, right? That it's spread across a much broader and wider demographic than we could see during the draft. But at the same time, we see a siloing of families where the military becomes more and more a family business. In the most recent reporting that I've seen, it's over half of new recruits have a direct family member who is in the military, right? So it's this interesting, both democratization and siloization of there, that it leads to actually a less siloed or less monolithic sort of military that we see. And I think that's often a misperception, right? That all of us are the same. There is a one veteran sort of idea. Like, no, there's actually, like, we are just as diverse as, like, everybody else, and our opinions are. I think if you even look at our when we ask people sort of how they identify politically of our membership, there's like literally a third identifies as Republican, a third
Mhm.
identifies as Democrat, and a third identifies as non-aligned, right? And like, okay, right. So I mean, that even just shows, I think, where we, and like I was like, oh, this is like Butamus, like perfect, like the distribution curve that we have here, right? And then you finally, I think there's a big misconception that still exists as to sort of why people join the military to begin with, and then that what that means for their sort of post-military identity and service, right? That there's I think a bit of a misconception that everyone joins because they are a huge patriotic flag waver, and that's the number one thing that we see. And like, yes, I think that's like patriotism and service to the Constitution and the ideals of democracy is something that is deeply held by everyone who has served, but there's also people who join for very concrete material reasons, right? Whether it is education benefits, it's still, the military is right now, it is the only proven pathway out of poverty into the middle class. Like the military is actually is the only career field that almost guarantees upward mobility, right? And for those that have been in poverty, not 100% guarantees, like nothing, didn't say that, right? But so I think that's important when we think about the veterans and where they are and where really equities are, which is why you also see a lot of veterans advocating for things like SNAP programs, right? Because they have been a part of it. Things like Medicaid has been a big part of like so many veterans' lives that we see. Is that, I think that's another misconception, that we're all, we were all sort of born wearing born wearing like fatigues with an American flag. Like, no, a lot of people, it was a really practical decision, that was made for practical rather than emotional reasons. And I think that's often forgotten. That also means that once people transition out, whether it is through getting out or retiring or however they do it, their equities are still very practical, right? They have a much more like practical mindset for what they want to advocate around as well.
Now, how can, individuals or local communities who want to, support or engage kind of the GWAT post 9/11, veterans, how can they do so in an effective way?
So I think there's a lot of ways you can do it. If you want to think about it from a community perspective,
Mhm.
that's there. I think it's a recognizing that there's more to service than just having a Veterans Day parade or Memorial Day
Mhm.
parade and asking someone to come and talk. But when you think about, I look at what some of the bigger cities have done, and this can be done and replicated in communities as well, is actually starting veterans commissions and councils to understand what are the needs that are there of veterans, and allow them to sort of lead, like what are the things that would attract veterans to our communities, that help ensure that veterans stay in our communities, that can show real service. And there's been positive things that have come out of these bigger commissions in New York and Virginia and
Mhm.
Illinois that we've seen, where you get more favorable employment law often around this. You see education, and like this is how the whole Yellow Ribbon program got started initially, right? So I think that's one thing, is think about like at the more local level, what can you do to bring veteran commissions to really show veterans' voices at the forefront. The next, as well, as I think when you have things like Veterans Day and you do things like
Mhm.
career fields, right? That you expand beyond just the, like, as I will say, the Rambo side of the military. Because I think, again, to really support veterans is to understand that the finance clerk and the supply clerk and the truck driver are every bit as much of a veteran as the Navy SEAL that's there, right? And to really expose people to who we are in a vast, again, like a very diverse way.
So those are two very actionable items. I
Yes,
like that.
I'll give you action items.
I've got it written down. I had not thought of the Veterans Commission. You've planted a seed in my head on that. I'm gonna look into that locally. So I appreciate that. So I know IAVA advocating for policies. What can you tell us kind of what maybe some recent wins are that you're most proud of, or kind of what y'all's priorities are, kind of in the immediacy?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I will say, as an aviator, I'm very excited the ACES Act just got passed and signed into law, which is the Aviation Cancer and Eye Safety Act, which puts tens of millions of dollars into research around the link between aviation and cancer. And this really, in my, like, as a aviator who had a super rare form of eye cancer, like, I am very, very happy to see this happen. And it is a, it's a big win in sort of like moving beyond just what we had in the PACT Act, right? The PACT Act recognized several environmental exposures, but in continuing that conversation, that, our generation of veteran as well was exposed to a lot of technological aspects too, right? Exposed to a lot new technologies that we just don't know what the long-term impact is going to be, right? So that's a big win. But if I think about where our top priorities are right now, the Afghan Allies Act is really, really important. And in August, the Afghan Adjustment Act and the Fulfilling Our Promise to Afghan Allies were introduced in the House and the Senate, respectively. And these acts really do a lot to codify the special immigrant status, as well as P1 and P2 visa statuses. And in addition, the Enduring Welcome Act was passed, which codifies all the mechanisms within the State Department that need to exist to ensure that this process can happen, right? So those pieces of legislation are huge, huge priorities, especially with Congress coming back into session right now. We're also very, very focused on a lot of these beyond the PACT Act roundtables and engagements. Again, looking at ACEs was one, but we're also looking at domestic exposures as another one. What's happening on bases with water. We look at things like our UAV pilots, even a lot of our translators, right, who may never have like gone down range, but they still are exposed to quite a bit, here when they are there. So really expanding the PACT Act, expanding what is considered a presumptive condition for folks based on more research and what they've experienced. And then finally, I think we're at a moment where we know, despite good, bad, other, I'm not going to put a value judgment on it, but like there are rapid changes happening at the VA. The VA is never going to be the same again. At IAVA, we look at that as an opportunity to be able to create and design a VA that meets our needs very, very deliberately, right? That actually meets the needs of the post 9/11 veterans in a real and meaningful way. And so this is a long-term project, but we're fortunate to have some amazing board members who have been, secretaries of the VA and general officers, to be able to sit down and work with us and look at like what could reimagining the VA really look like? How could we reimagine it in this moment to meet our needs? Because if there is anything that's happening right now, there is an opening for some change.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at that. So can you tell us what gives you hope for the future of our veteran community?
Well, I will say every day what gives me hope is our cavalry and our leadership fellows. Like I tell people all the time, I've been working in various different points of policy now for over a decade at this point. I mean, beyond that, if you call it my time in uniform that I was on the Hill, but like in a civilian capacity, a little more than a decade, I've been actively involved in public policy work. And our cavalry and our fellows are some of the smartest people I've ever been around, the most passionate people I've ever been around, the most dedicated people I've ever been around, and bring such different and essential equities to the table. It's amazing, right? When I watch these people come together in our fly-ins or during our trainings, who come from vastly different backgrounds, who had vastly different service. I mean, we had everything from someone who got out as a E4 in the National Guard and did one deployment downrange to people who are retired 1-stars, right? Like the whole gamut, but they can come together and singularly focus on getting things done. If we look at some of our big wins of the PACT Act, the post 9/11 GI Bill that's happened, the Deborah Samsa Act that came through, it came through because what we see in the veteran community is once again a group that they took the uniform off, but the value of coming together to work for a common goal never went away. And while there are hierarchies and rank structures in the military and they matter, what I've seen so much is people, once they take the uniform off, that goes away, but that ethos of we are a team to get the job done lives on. And at that moment, when the days get hard, that's what keeps me going.
That's very encouraging. So do you have any final words of kind of advice or thoughts or action items you'd like to leave people with?
Well, I mean, If you haven't joined IAVA, join IAVA. It's free for everyone. You can go to IAVA.org. If there's different, you don't have to be a veteran to join us either. Like, we welcome our allies and supporters, but there are, if you are a veteran, there's a lot of different opportunities to have your voice heard, whether it's through some of our surveys and needs assessments to make sure we really are reflective of you. Because when I say these are our policy priorities, these aren't Kai Hunter's policy priorities. These really come from our members. And that's what I think is really important here. It's like, this is what our membership says our priorities is, not what I say our priorities should be. So please join us, stay up to date. I think the biggest things right now is to be pushing on the FPAA and AAA and the Enduring Welcome Acts to really keep those promises to our Afghan allies, because that's what a lot of our first few weeks of December is going to, or September, not December, September is going to be centered around.
Well, thank you so much, Kai, for sharing your insights, your experiences. I was thrilled that you came on the show and really enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you, and looking forward to future conversations too.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Tipping Spears. We hope this conversation has sparked new ideas and challenged the way you think. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, and we'll catch you next time with another exciting guest.